Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with our Addy stories. Happy Birthday Addy, Chapter 2, Sunshine. When Addy came home from school the next day, a small wagon loaded with furniture was in front of the tall boarding house. Boarders often moved in and out. Mr. and Mrs. Golden, who owned the building house, rented out 5 rooms, but Addy was the only child in the house. She looked carefully at the things in the wagon, hoping to see something belonging to a child. Maybe a doll sticking out of a crate, but all she saw was furniture. Mr. Golden came out of the door. Addy thought his name was perfect for him. His skin was golden brown. "Good afternoon, Addy. How are you today?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Golden," Addy said. "I'm doing fine. Who's moving in?" Mr. Golden sat down on the front step and wiped his neck with a handkerchief. "By the looks of all this furniture, you think a family of 10 was moving in, but it's just one person, my mother." "Oh," Addy said, a little disappointed that she wouldn't get a playmate. "Would you like some help?" "No, thank you kindly," Mr. Golden said, getting up on the front step. He went over to the wagon. Addy went up to her family's room on the 2nd floor. She flopped on her bed and reached for a doll, Ida Bean, who had been lying on her pillow. Addy loved Ida Bean. She loved to cuddle with Ida and tell her secrets. But even with Ida to keep her company, Addy still felt lonely during the long afternoons. All the adults in the boarding house were at work. Mrs. Golden was busy making supper for everyone and didn't want to be disturbed. Mama and Papa didn't get home until late. Sometimes they didn't get home in time for the dinner Mrs. Golden had served. On those days, Addy still joined the other boarders for supper in the dining room. This evening was one of those times, so when Mrs. Golden rang her bell, Addy went down to the dining room by herself. She took her place at one of the 2 tables. 4 other boarders sat at the table, but they didn't pay attention to Addy. They were talking about the trouble black people were facing on the streetcars. "Did you see today's paper?" Mrs. Golden asked. "There was almost a riot on a streetcar downtown. 3 colored people were hurt." "I'm getting too scared to even ride the streetcars at all," one woman said. A man joined in. "Well, I heard a conductor threw a colored man off the Pine Street car and broke his leg." "If they just let us sit inside, there wouldn't be all this trouble," another young woman at the table added. "That'll be the day," said Mr. Golden sourly. "I'll be an old man before I see that change come." Their talk scared Addy. The longer she listened, the less she was interested in her supper. She began playing with her napkin ring, and she only picked at her dinner of oxtail stew and mashed carrots. After dinner, Addy headed back to her room. She was halfway up the stairs when she heard a bird singing. Quietly, Addy tiptoed back to the stairs. The bird's beautiful song was like a trail that Addy followed down the narrow hall. The trail stopped at the open door of a room at the end. The room was unlit. The faint light from the hall was the only brightness in it. At first, Addy saw only her shadow in the room, but then she got used to the dimness. She saw a cage hanging before the window. It was a small yellow bird sitting on the perch singing out happily. She stood at her door for a minute, enjoying its song. Suddenly, a woman's voice interrupted. "You can come in, child." Addy was so startled she jumped. She hadn't seen anyone in the darkened room. She moved a few steps inside. The woman lit a kerosene lamp, and Addy saw the furniture she had seen on the wagon earlier that day. The woman sat in a high-back rocking chair next to the cage. "Good evening, ma'am," Addy said. "I'm Addy Walker. Me and my mama and papa live upstairs. You Mr. Golden's mama?" "That's right," the woman answered. "Come on in and meet my bird, Sunny." Addy went closer to the stage. It was that she saw the woman's eyes. The colored parts of her eyes, the irises, were covered with a cloudy whiteness. Addy stood staring at the woman. "Didn't know I was blind, did you?" Mrs. Golden asked. Addy answered quickly. "No, ma'am. If you blind, how'd you know I was standing outside your door?" "I got plenty of ways of seeing," answered Mrs. Golden. "I heard your footsteps. They were soft as a whisper, and they were spaced close together so I could tell you were a child." "How old are you, Addy?" Mrs. Golden asked. "When is your birthday?" "I'm 9, Addy said, but I really ain't sure when my birthday is. I was born in the spring. My mama knew that much." Addy felt ashamed that she didn't know her birthday. Her seatmate at school, Harriet, knew when her birthday was. On that day, Harriet's mother had sent fancy raisin tarts for the whole class. That's a shame you don't know your birthday, said Mrs. Golden. I was just listening to you talk. I think you were born into slavery. Yes, ma'am, Addie said. How'd you know? Well, most slaves don't know their birthdays, Mrs. Golden continued. I was born right here in Philadelphia, but my parents were born into slavery over 100 years ago. I'm an old woman, you know. I was there the day God invented dirt. Addie looked at Mrs. Golden in disbelief. Mrs. Golden laughed, so light and high it made the room brighter. Addie joined in with her laughter. You real funny, ma'am. Addie said, my brother Sam would like you. He likes riddles and jokes. Your brother, Mrs. Golden said. You didn't mention him. Does he live here too? No, ma'am. Addie explained sadly. We don't know where Sam is. He might still be a slave, but he wanted to be a soldier. He and my papa were sold off of the plantation. Then my mom and me ran away here. We had to leave my baby sister on the plantation when we left. But someday we're going to all be together again. Slavery has taken a lot away from colored people, Mrs. Golden said. If we want to get some of it back, we're going to have to take it. It's going to be some time before your family gets all back together. But I know one thing you can take for yourself right now, Addie. Whenever you want, you can choose a special day and claim it for your birthday. Addie had never thought about this before. That's a good idea, she explained. I want a really special day. I want me a perfect day for my birthday. No, I told you I've been around a long time and never seen such a thing as a perfect day, Mrs. Golden said. How about the day God invented dirt? Addie joked. Oh no, Mrs. Golden said. Even that wasn't perfect, but there is something special in every day. Well, how do I know what day is right for my birthday? Asked Addie. You'll just know, answered Mrs. Golden. When that almost perfect day comes along, it'll be meant just for you. Now, the day God invented birds was special, close to perfect, and I was there for that too. Sonny seemed to understand what Mrs. Golden was saying. He sang happily with his head cocked back and his breast puffed out. Mrs. Golden, why is your bird in a cage? It seems like he'd be sad and lonesome all there by himself, Addie said. Mrs. Golden closed her eyes for a minute before she answered. I can tell you are a smart girl. You think about things. I do think Sonny is lonely sometimes. I think I can hear it in his song, but we keep each other company. When I hear him singing out for his soul, it brings sunshine in my life. Addie thought about that. But he's still locked up. Oh, child, answered Mrs. Golden. The cage can't contain Sonny's spirit. It soars right out from behind these bars. That's what's important for all of us, to let our souls sing out. Sometimes it's hard to do that, you know, Addie replied, to let yourself sing out if you're feeling lonely or sad. Sure is, said Mrs. Golden, looking right at her. I'll tell you, Addie, when you first spoke to me tonight, I could hear a touch of loneliness in your voice. But even then, I can hear you singing out. Addie looked away from Mrs. Golden. Addie knew she was blind, but she felt that Mrs. Golden was looking deep inside her. Well, I better get going, Addie said. I still have lessons to do, Mrs. Golden. Don't be a stranger at my door now, Mrs. Golden said. Come visit me and Sonny whenever you like. And one more thing. Please call me my dear. That's what my family calls me. I will, replied Addie. I will. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.